From critically acclaimed major box office successes to lesser known cult classics to the odd personal bias, I have taken up the task of bringing you the top 50 greatest horror movies of all time. I'm going to bring it to you in two parts. Coming up now is number 50 to 25, and you can also see number 25 to number 1. Not an easy task, but I do hope that you enjoy. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Welcome to Den of Horror. Starting on a somewhat controversial note, the 50th greatest horror movie of all time simply has to be the brilliantly written The Cabin in the Woods. This film gives 80s style violence, thrills and gore, but also classy nods to previous horror masterpieces such as Friday the 13th, The Evil Dead and Saw. Another homage to classic horror, this one stylish, sensual and scary, and deserving of a place on any self-respecting horror list. Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is an Iranian vampire masterpiece, and it probably also presents us with the greatest and classiest vampire of the last 25 years. The only musical on this list sees Johnny Depp sing and slice his way through. Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, is Tim Burton at his magnificent best. He unleashes his distinctive visual gothic style, as well as scares, gores, and bucket loads of cold-blooded revenge, not to mention the odd sing-along or two. Not a personal favorite, but this torture porn splatterfest practically saved horror in the early 2000s. Saw not only launched one of the most successful franchises in modern-day horror, but also let loose one of the genre's most sadistic and manipulative antagonists. At 46 is a film that simply defies categorization. More bonkers than it is scary, The Lighthouse is an unnerving and disturbing contemplation on what it's like to lose your mind. Innovative, engaging, insane. The Others haunts the mid-40s. This haunted house story is a psychological horror masterpiece and also makes this list for Nicole Kidman's brilliant performance, its unnerving score, creepy visuals, and also being one of the few original horror films to stand out during the early 2000s. Famous for arguably being the first true horror film, silent, dark, arty. There simply would be no Frankenstein, no Dracula, no the Wolfman, and no Tim Burton, if not for The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Australia's Wolf Creek is an uncompromising real-life horror with so much violence and gore and tension that it's almost unbearable to watch. If you've seen it, you'll know why it makes this list, and if you haven't, I dare you to go and watch it, preferably during the day and with a comedy waiting in the wings. Blade gave us the unlikely pairing of horror and the superhero genre, but it did much more than that. It gave us a horror movie that was cool, slick and action-packed, as well as a superhero movie that was scary. And it also knew exactly where its blood-sucking horror roots lay. It's easy to see why Quentin Tarantino praised It Follows. This film brought back the teen slasher thrills of the 80s and also presented its unsettling premise in a way that was timeless, tense, and not to mention a hell of a lot of fun to watch. Closing off the 40s is the 1941 classic amongst classics, The Wolfman. Often imitated but impossible to rival, it is the quintessential and definitive werewolf movie, and also happens to star my favorite of all the Universal monsters, the tragic Wolfman. Train-spotting director Danny Boyle once claimed that his post-apocalyptic masterpiece, 28 Days Later, was not a zombie film, yet this cult classic breathed new life into the undead and has since become the standard to measure any modern-day zombie film by. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Interview with a Vampire. No, forget it. You know what? I'm going to let personal bias take over. Coming in at number 38 is my personal favorite vampire movie of all time, Fright Night. Oh, it's my list. 1981 saw not just one but two huge lycanthropes tear up screens. Joe Dante's The Howling had a few laughs, but it had plenty of scares too, and it is, in my opinion, one of the few werewolf horror picks that truly stand out of the pack. While Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho got all of the attention and praise, Peeping Tom, a film about a serial killer that records the terrified expressions of his dying victims, received critical backlash for its explicit sex and violence, but this film pushed the boundaries of horror in ways that were only truly appreciated many years after its release. Is there a more iconic horror film than James Whale's Frankenstein? Or a more beloved monster than the Frankenstein monster? Its magic, its innovation, its tragedy should arguably be way higher up this list, but I promise you that this is not the last that you'll hear of Frankenstein. David Cronenberg is probably the most controversial director working in Hollywood today, but with The Fly, he combined his uncompromising and unconventional vision with a tragic love story, and the results were a gory and shocking tale of a terminal, fascinating and simply unforgettable transformation, or should I say, deformation. Dracula, but not the one that you think, makes it at number 33. As much as we all love Bela Lugosi's 1931 classic, for me, it's Hammer's Horror of Dracula, with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing giving us the story of Count Dracula at its most prime evil and hypnotic best. Way before The Boy and Annabelle, in 1988, Tom Holland gave us Child's Play, a story about a serial killer-possessed doll named Chucky, who stabbed his way into our nightmares with many measures of blood, guts, gore, horror, not to mention some sick humor and wit. Zack Snyder. Love him, hate him, that's up to you. Me, I'll always thank him for giving us the Zombies in a Shopping Mall classic Dawn of the Dead, a film that still holds up today, nearly 20 years since its release. So what if Friday the 13th is basically a carbon copy of another slasher masterpiece featuring a masked madman? No greatest horror movie list would be complete without it. And no other horror movie can really boast immortalizing the hockey mask in the same way, even though the famous hockey mask only appeared in part 3. What would you do if you found out that your son was the Antichrist? The Omen deals with precisely this question, and it has since become one of the scariest horror movies of all time, or at least so it is said. This film is practically horror royalty. Man, the 80s was a great decade for horror, and one of its biggest hits was Tobe Hooper's seminal classic Poltergeist. And should this one be higher up? Or will that spot be saved for another Tobe Hooper classic? We've had a few zombie movies already, but George Romero's zombie classic Night of the Living Dead isn't merely a zombie movie, but it has become one of horror's most influential films of all time. Who would have thought that the greatest ever werewolf transformation caught on film would be in a comedy horror featuring a Creedence Clearwater Revival song? However, the debate continues. Is it The Wolfman, The Howling, or this film at number 26, American Werewolf in London, that is the greatest werewolf movie ever made? I have my opinion, but what's yours? Let me know in the comments below.